There's something extraordinary that happens when you're at the end of yourself, when exhaustion weighs down your shoulders like concrete blocks, when confusion clouds your mind like fog rolling through a valley, when fear grips your chest so tight you can barely breathe. In those moments, most of us do what feels natural. We analyze, we strategize, we call friends, we scroll through our phones looking for answers or distractions. But what if I told you there's one simple practice that could transform everything? What if the very thing you need most when you're tired, confused, or afraid is the one thing you're probably not doing first? My name is Sarah, and for the past 15 years I've walked through some of the darkest valleys you can imagine. Financial ruin that left my family homeless, a marriage that nearly ended in divorce, health scares that made me question everything, seasons where I felt so lost I couldn't even remember who I was anymore. And through every single one of these trials, I discovered something that changed not just my circumstances, but my entire approach to life. The answer isn't what you think it is. It's not positive thinking. It's not manifestation. It's not even having more faith. It's something far more practical, far more immediate, and far more powerful than any self-help strategy you've ever tried. Here's what I'm going to share with you today. First, I'm going to reveal the 3 critical mistakes that keep us trapped in cycles of exhaustion, confusion, and fear. These are patterns that 99% of people fall into without even realizing it, and they're sabotaging your peace before you even have a chance to find it. Then I'm going to walk you through the exact framework I use when life feels overwhelming. This isn't theory. This is what actually works when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, when anxiety is eating you alive, when you feel like you're drowning in your own thoughts. And finally, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide that you can use immediately. No matter where you are right now, no matter how hopeless things feel, this is your starting point. But before we dive in, let me tell you why this matters so much to me and why I believe it could change your life too. 3 years ago, I was sitting in my car in a parking lot, sobbing uncontrollably. My husband had just told me he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay married. My teenage daughter was struggling with depression and barely speaking to me. My business was failing, and we were behind on our mortgage. I felt like I was failing at everything that mattered most to me. In that moment, I did what I always did when life got hard. I made lists, I created action plans, I researched solutions online. I called my sister to vent. I did everything except the one thing that could actually help. And you know what happened? I stayed stuck. For months I spun my wheels, trying harder and harder to fix everything on my own, and everything just got worse. That's when something shifted. Not because I suddenly became wiser or stronger, but because I finally got desperate enough to try a different approach, an approach that felt almost too simple to work. But here's the thing about simple solutions. They're often the most profound ones. The first mistake we make when we're tired, confused, or afraid is what I call the action trap. We think the answer is to do more, try harder, figure it out faster. When we're exhausted, we drink more coffee and push through. When we're confused, we research endlessly and ask everyone for advice. When we're afraid, we try to control every variable we can think of. But here's what I learned the hard way. Action without direction is just expensive motion. Think about it. When you're physically tired, what does your body need? Rest. But when you're emotionally or spiritually tired, we somehow think the answer is to do more. We pile on more responsibilities, more solutions, more strategies. We treat our souls like machines that just need better fuel or more efficient processes. But souls don't work like machines. They need something completely different. The second mistake is what I call the information obsession. When we're confused, we think what we need is more data, more opinions, more research, more perspectives. So we ask 10 different people what they think we should do. And then we're more confused than when we started because we have 10 different answers. Or we spend hours scrolling through articles and videos thinking that somewhere out there is the perfect piece of information that will make everything clear. But here's what I discovered. Confusion isn't usually an information problem. It's a clarity problem, and clarity doesn't come from gathering more facts. It comes from getting quiet enough to hear what you already know deep down. The third mistake is the control illusion. When we're afraid, we think safety comes from controlling our circumstances, so we make backup plans for our backup plans. We try to anticipate every possible thing that could go wrong. We micromanage every detail we can get our hands on. We think if we can just control enough variables, we'll feel secure, but control is exhausting. And the more tightly we grip, the more anxious we become, because deep down we know we can't actually control most of what happens to us. Real peace doesn't come from controlling circumstances. It comes from trusting something bigger than circumstances. So if action, information, and control aren't the answers, what is? What do you do when you're at the end of your rope and nothing you've tried is working? You pray first. Now, before you roll your eyes or click away, hear me out. I'm not talking about religious ritual or perfectly crafted words or following someone else's formula. I'm talking about something much more fundamental. Prayer, at its core, is simply acknowledging that you're not the center of the universe. It's recognizing that there's wisdom beyond your understanding, power beyond your strength, and love beyond your ability to earn it. When I say always pray first, I mean before you make the phone call, before you Google the solution, before you create the action plan, before you worry yourself sick trying to figure it out, take that need, that fear, that confusion, and put it somewhere outside of yourself first. Not because prayer is magic, but because it changes your posture. It shifts you from striving to receiving, from panic to peace, from isolation to connection. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like practically. It's Sunday evening, and you're dreading Monday morning because you have a conversation with your boss that could determine your future at the company. Your mind is racing with all the ways it could go wrong. You've practiced what you're going to say 100 times. You've researched your company's policies. You've asked 3 different friends what they think you should do. But you're still anxious. You're still afraid. You're still lying awake at night playing out worst-case scenarios. This is where most of us live, in the gap between preparation and peace. Here's what praying first looks like in this situation. Instead of immediately diving into more preparation or more worry, you take 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. You sit quietly and you say something like this: I don't know how this conversation is going to go. I'm scared. I've done what I can to prepare, but I need help with what I can't control. I need wisdom for what to say and what not to say. I need courage to speak truth with kindness. I need peace that doesn't depend on the outcome. That's it. No fancy words, no perfect theology, just honesty about where you are and what you need. And something shifts. Not necessarily your circumstances, but your relationship to your circumstances. The fear doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip on you. The uncertainty doesn't go away, but it stops consuming you. This is what I mean by always pray first. It's not about adding another item to your to-do list. It's about starting from a different place entirely. Instead of starting from your own limited perspective, you start from the recognition that there's a bigger story happening. Instead of starting from scarcity and fear, you start from the possibility of provision and peace. But here's where it gets interesting. Praying first doesn't just change how you feel about your problems. It often changes what problems you focus on in the first place. When you step back and get that broader perspective, you realize that some of the things you were worried about don't actually matter that much. And some of the things you weren't paying attention to are actually the key to everything. Remember that night in the parking lot when my world was falling apart, when I finally stopped trying to fix everything myself and started praying first. Something remarkable happened. Not immediately, but gradually. I began to see patterns I had missed. I started noticing opportunities that were right in front of me the whole time. I found courage I didn't know I had, not because prayer changed my circumstances, but because it changed me. The conversation with my husband didn't magically become easy, but I approached it from a place of love instead of fear. My daughter's depression didn't disappear overnight, but I stopped taking it personally and started really listening to her. My business challenges didn't vanish, but I made decisions from wisdom instead of panic. Here's what I want you to understand. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, your instincts are going to tell you to do something immediately. To fix it, figure it out, or control it. These aren't bad instincts. They're human instincts, but they're not your best option. Your best option is to begin where peace begins. And peace doesn't begin with having all the answers. It begins with acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. Peace doesn't begin with feeling strong. It begins with admitting you're weak and finding strength outside yourself. Peace doesn't begin with certainty about the future. It begins with trust in the present moment. This is why prayer comes first, not because it's the most spiritual thing to do, but because it's the most practical thing to do. It aligns you with reality instead of fighting against it. It connects you to resources beyond your own limited supply. It gives you access to wisdom that isn't clouded by fear or exhaustion or confusion. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't need special training or years of experience. You don't have to use the right words or follow the right format. You just have to be willing to start somewhere other than your own strength. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in real life, because I know some of you are thinking this sounds nice in theory, but you're wondering how it actually works when your world is imploding. Last month, I got a call from my year-old son. Had been arrest friend Jessica at 11 o'clock at night. She was in full panic mode, her 16 for shoplifting, and she was spiraling. She'd already called 3 different lawyers, researched juvenile court procedures online for 2 hours, and texted her sister a novel-length message about how she was a terrible mother who had failed her child. "Sarah, I don't know what to do," she said through tears. "I've been trying to figure this out for hours, and I just keep going in circles. I'm exhausted, but I can't sleep. I'm terrified about what this means for his future. What college is going to want him now? What if this ruins everything?" Sound familiar? This is exactly what our minds do when crisis hits. We immediately jump into problem-solving mode, but we're operating from a place of fear and exhaustion, so our solutions just create more problems. Here's what I told Jessica, and here's what I'm telling you. Stop. Just stop. Before you make another phone call, before you do another Google search, before you create another worst-case scenario in your head, pray first. "But Sarah, I don't even know how to pray about this. What am I supposed to say? Dear God, please make my son's arrest disappear. That's not how it works." And she's right. That's not how it works. But that's not what praying first means either. Praying first isn't about asking God to change your circumstances, though sometimes that happens. Praying first is about changing your starting point. It's about beginning from a place of connection instead of isolation, from trust instead of terror, from love instead of fear. So I walked Jessica through what this looks like practically. Jess, forget about trying to say the right thing. Just tell the truth about where you are right now. Say something like, "I'm scared to help him. I don't know what the I love my son, and I don't know how don't have and strength right next step is. I need wisdom. I don't feel." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, but what if nothing changes? What if I pray and everything is still a mess?" This is the question everyone asks, and it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about what prayer actually does. We think prayer is supposed to change our circumstances first, but prayer changes us first, and when we change, everything else shifts. Within 20 minutes of that phone call, Jessica called me back. Same circumstances. Her son was still in trouble. The legal issues were still real. But her voice was completely different. She was calm. She was thinking clearly. She had called 1 lawyer instead of 3 and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. She had talked to her son with love instead of panic. She had gone to bed and actually slept. "It's the weirdest thing," she told me the next day. "Nothing about the situation changed, but I felt like I could breathe again, like I wasn't carrying it all by myself anymore." This is what praying first does. It doesn't make your problems disappear, but it makes you bigger than your problems. It doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it gives you peace in the middle of uncertainty. It doesn't guarantee the outcome you want, but it guarantees you won't face it alone. Now let me address the elephant in the room. Some of you are thinking, this is just a coping mechanism. This is just psychological comfort. Prayer isn't actually doing anything real. And honestly, I don't care if you call it a coping mechanism. If a coping mechanism can transform how you show up in your marriage, how you parent your children, how you handle workplace stress, how you navigate health scares, how you deal with financial pressure, then it's a pretty powerful coping mechanism, don't you think? But here's what I've experienced over and over again, and what thousands of people have told me. When you consistently pray first, things happen that you can't explain away as psychological comfort. Doors open that were closed. Solutions appear that you never would have thought of. People show up at exactly the right time with exactly what you need. Strength comes from somewhere you can't identify. Call it coincidence if you want. Call it the universe. Call it your subconscious mind. Call it whatever makes you comfortable. But don't let your need to explain it keep you from experiencing it. Here's another practical example. My neighbor Tom lost his job last year after 23 years with the same company. The termination was sudden, unexpected, and devastating. At 58 years old, he was convinced his career was over. He spent the first month sending out hundreds of resumes, networking frantically, and working himself into a state of complete exhaustion. "I'm doing everything right," he told me over the fence one afternoon. "I'm treating job hunting like a full-time job. I'm following up on every lead. I'm applying to everything I'm qualified for and some things I'm not. But nothing's happening. I'm starting to think I'm too old, that nobody wants to hire someone my age." Tom isn't a particularly religious guy, but he was desperate enough to listen when I suggested he try praying first before each day of job searching. Not praying for a job necessarily, but praying for guidance, for peace, for the ability to see opportunities he might be missing. "I felt ridiculous at first," he admitted later, "but I figured I had nothing to lose. So every morning before I opened my laptop, I would sit quietly for a few minutes and just say, 'Show me where I'm supposed to go. Help me see what I'm not seeing. Give me peace about this process.' Within 2 weeks, something shifted. Tom stopped applying for every job posting he could find and started being more selective. He reached out to former colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years. He considered opportunities in industries he had never thought about before. He started volunteering at a local non-profit, not as a networking strategy, but because it felt right. 3 months later, Tom landed a position that was salary, better benefits, better work environment, better than his previous job in every way, better, more meaningful work. But here's the thing that gets me. The opportunity came through a connection he made while volunteering, a connection he never would have made if he had it was prayer or just slowing down enough, kept doing what he was doing before. "I don't know if to think clearly," Tom said. "But something about starting my day differently changed everything. I stopped being so frantic and started being more intentional. I stopped trying to force things and started trusting the process. This is what I want you to see. Praying first doesn't just give you comfort, though it does that too. It change your emotions, though it does that. Your approach. It changes what you pay attention to. It changes the quality of your decisions. It changes how you show up in the world. When you're tired, your instinct is to push harder. But what if the answer isn't more energy? What if the answer is different energy? The kind of energy that comes from being connected to something larger than yourself. Something that doesn't run on caffeine and willpower and sheer determination. When you're confused, your instinct is to gather more information. But what if the answer isn't more data? What if the answer is deeper, quiet enough to hear what you already know, that comes not from analyzing every option, but from getting discernment, the kind of clarity in your heart? When you're afraid, your instinct is to control everything you can. But what if the answer is unshakable, even when everything around that you're held by something, and that comes not from managing every variable, but from knowing more control? What if the answer is better trust, the kind of peace you is shaking? This is why we pray first, not as a last resort when everything else has failed, but as a first response when life gets complicated. Because prayer doesn't just change what happens to you. It changes what happens everything else in you. And what happens in you determines. Let me share with you the exact framework I use when life feels overwhelming, and then I'll give you the step-by-step process you can implement immediately. You're facing right no matter what now. I call it the peace framework, and it saved my sanity more times than I can count. P stands for pause. E is for empty. A is for ask. C is for connect. E is for embrace. These 5 steps will transform how you handle every difficult moment in your life. But before I break this down, let me tell you about Maria. She reached out to me 6 months ago, completely overwhelmed. She was a single mother of 3, working 2 jobs, trying to finish her nursing degree, and her car had just broken down. She was at that breaking point we all recognize. The place where you feel like you're drowning, and every solution requires energy you simply don't have. Sarah, I keep hearing you say pray first, but I barely have time to shower, let alone pray, she wrote. I wake up already behind, and I fall into bed exhausted. When exactly am I supposed to fit prayer into my life? This is the question I get more than any other. And it reveals a massive misconception about what praying first actually looks like. We think it has to be long, elaborate, formal. We picture people on their knees for hours, speaking in King James English, or following complicated religious rituals. But here's the truth. The most powerful prayers I've ever prayed have been 3 words long. Help me, God. Show me peace. Give me strength. That's it. No flowery language, no perfect theology. Just honest desperation meeting infinite love. The peace framework starts with pause. This is literally stopping whatever frantic activity your mind is engaged in. When you feel that familiar spiral starting, when the anxiety begins to build, when the confusion starts clouding your thinking, you pause. Not for 20 minutes, not even for 5 minutes, sometimes just for 30 seconds. Last week, I was in the middle of a heated argument with my husband about money. We were both getting louder, more defensive, saying things we didn't mean. I could feel us heading toward one of those fights that damages more than it resolves. In that moment, I remembered to pause. Can we just stop for a second? I asked. I need a minute. I went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and took 3 deep breaths. That pause changed everything. When I came back, I was able to speak from love instead of fear, to listen instead of just waiting for my turn to talk. The pause isn't about suppressing your emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about creating space between the trigger and your response. It's about refusing to let urgency rob you of wisdom. Next comes empty. This is where you acknowledge what you're actually carrying. Most of us are walking around with invisible backpacks full of worries, fears, resentments, and responsibilities that aren't even ours to bear. The empty step is about naming what's in that backpack and setting it down. I'm carrying fear about my daughter's future. I'm carrying anger about being passed over for that promotion. I'm carrying guilt about not being a better mother. I'm carrying worry about whether we'll have enough money for retirement. You don't have to solve these things in this moment. You just have to acknowledge them, because you can't address what you won't admit you're carrying. Then comes ask. This is where prayer becomes practical. You're not asking for magic or miracles, though sometimes those happen. You're asking for what you actually need in this moment. Wisdom to know what to do next. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, strength that doesn't come from caffeine and stubbornness, love that can override fear. Give me words that heal instead of wound. Help me see this situation clearly. Show me what's actually mine to carry and what I need to release. Fill me with peace that makes no earthly sense. These aren't vague requests. They're specific, practical needs. And here's what I've discovered. When you ask for these things consistently, you start receiving them consistently. Connect is about remembering you're not alone in this. Whatever you're facing, you're not the first to you that's been tested by millions be the last. There's wisdom available person to face it, and you one of people across thousands of years. There's strength available to you that doesn't depend on how much sleep you got last night or how much coffee you drank this morning. This isn't about religion, necessarily. It's about recognizing that you're part of something bigger than your individual struggle. When you connect to that bigger story, your problems don't disappear, but they find their proper size. Finally, embrace. This is about accepting what is while remaining open to what could be. It's about embracing the uncertainty instead of fighting it. Embracing your limitations instead of denying them. Embracing the fact that you don't have to have everything figured out right now. When Maria first tried the peace framework, she was skeptical. "It sounds too simple," she said. "My problems are complicated. How is a 5-minute process going to help with childcare and car repairs and school deadlines?" But she was desperate enough to try it. That first week, she used it 4 times. Once when her youngest had a meltdown in the grocery store. Once when her professor assigned a paper she didn't have time to write. Once when her babysitter cancelled last minute. Once when the car repair estimate was twice what she expected. "The weirdest thing happened," she told me. "My circumstances didn't change immediately, but my capacity to handle them did. I stopped feeling like every crisis was the end of the world. I started seeing solutions I hadn't noticed before." Within a month, Maria had found a better babysitter through a connection at church. A classmate offered to help with her paper in exchange for help with a project Maria was good at. Her mechanic worked out a payment plan that fit her budget. Her supervisor at work approved a schedule change that gave her more time for school. "I don't know if it was prayer or just thinking differently," Maria said, "but everything started flowing better. Not perfectly, but better. This is what happens when you consistently pray first. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes manageable. Problems don't disappear, but solutions appear. Stress doesn't vanish, but peace shows up in the middle of stress. Now let me give you the specific steps you can take today, right now, wherever you are. Because I know some of you are thinking this sounds nice, but you need something concrete you can actually do. Step 1, choose your trigger. Identify the feeling that usually sends you into panic mode. Is it that tight feeling in your chest when you think about money? The overwhelming sensation when you look at your to-do list? The fear that grips you when your phone rings at an unusual hour? Whatever that trigger is, that's your cue to pray first. Not after you've worried for an hour, not after you've called 3 people for advice, not after you've researched solutions online until 2 in the morning. Right when you feel that trigger, that's when you pause and pray. Step 2, create your go-to prayer. This isn't about eloquence or theology. This is about having something ready to say when your mind is spinning too fast for creativity. Write down 3 sentences that you can use when you're overwhelmed. Here are some examples. God, I don't know what to do here, but you do. Give me peace and show me the next step. Or, I'm scared and I need help. Please calm my heart and clear my mind. Or, this feels too big for me to handle alone. Please carry what I can't carry and guide what I can control. Write your 3 sentences down. Put them in your phone. Stick them on your bathroom mirror. Make them easily accessible because in crisis moments, your brain doesn't work as well as it does right now. Step 3, start small and be consistent. Don't try to become a prayer warrior overnight. Don't commit to hour-long prayer sessions that you'll abandon after 3 days. Commit to 30 seconds of praying first before you react to stressful situations. 30 seconds. That's shorter than most commercials, but those 30 seconds will change how you respond to everything else. They'll create space for wisdom instead of reaction, for peace instead of panic, for clarity instead of confusion. Step 4. Notice what changes. This isn't about keeping score or proving that prayer works. It's about paying attention to subtle shifts in how you feel, how you think, how you respond to challenges. Notice when you feel more peaceful. Notice when solutions appear that you hadn't thought of. Notice when conversations go better than expected. These aren't coincidences. They're the natural result of starting from a different place, of approaching life from connection instead of isolation, from trust instead of fear. Let me tell you about David, a business owner who was on the verge of losing everything 3 years ago. His company was hemorrhaging money, he was behind on his mortgage, and his marriage was struggling under the financial pressure. He was working 18-hour days, barely sleeping, snapping at his employees and his wife. "I was in pure survival mode," he told me. "Every decision was made from desperation. I was so focused on trying to save my business that I was destroying everything else in my life." David started praying first, before every major business decision, before difficult conversations with employees, before meetings with creditors, before discussions with his wife about their finances. It sounds crazy, but those 30 seconds of prayer before each crisis completely changed how I handled things, he said. Instead of reacting from fear, I started responding from a place of calm. Instead of making desperate decisions, I started making wise ones. His business didn't turn around overnight, but his approach to the crisis completely shifted. He had honest conversations with his employees about the situation and asked for their input on solutions. 3 of them took temporary pay cuts in exchange for equity in the company. He negotiated payment plans with creditors instead of avoiding their calls. He and his wife started working together on the financial challenges instead of fighting about them. 18 months later, David's company was not only profitable again, but stronger than it had ever been. His marriage had survived the crisis and was deeper than before. His relationship with his employees was built on trust and transparency. "I don't think any of that would have happened if I had kept trying to handle everything from my own limited perspective," David said. "Praying first didn't change my circumstances immediately, but it changed me immediately. And when I changed, everything else eventually changed too." This is the power of always. It's not manipulation. It's praying first. It's not magic alignment. It's starting from the right place instead of starting from the wrong place. It's acknowledging that your perspective is limited, your strength is finite, and your wisdom is incomplete. And that's okay, because you have access to perspective that's unlimited, strength that's infinite, and wisdom that's perfect. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you have a choice. You can start from your exhaustion, your confusion, your fear. You can let those feelings drive your decisions and determine your responses. Or you can start from a different place entirely. You can start from the recognition that you're loved beyond measure, guided beyond your understanding, and held by something stronger than whatever you're facing. You can start from the knowledge that you don't have to figure everything out right now, that you don't have to carry everything by yourself, that you don't have to be perfect to be helped. This is where peace begins, not in having all the answers, but in knowing you're connected to the source of all answers. Not in feeling strong enough to handle everything, but in knowing you're supported by strength that never fails. Not in controlling every outcome, but in trusting that you're part of a bigger story that's still being written. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you start your to-do list, before you begin the day's worries, try something different. Take 30 seconds and pray first. See what happens when you begin from connection instead of isolation, from trust instead of fear, from love instead of anxiety. Your circumstances might not change immediately, but you will. And when you change, everything else shifts too. But let me tell you what happens when you don't pray first. When you let exhaustion, confusion, and fear become your default starting point. Because I want you to see the stark difference between these two approaches, and I want you to understand what you're actually choosing between. When you don't pray first, you operate from what I call the scarcity spiral. Everything feels urgent. Every problem feels like a crisis. Every setback feels like the end of the world. You're constantly in reaction mode, putting out fires instead of preventing them. You make decisions based on worst-case scenarios instead of trusting that there might be possibilities you can't see yet. I know this spiral intimately because I lived in it for years. Let me paint you a picture of what my Tuesday looked like 2 months ago, before I fully understood what I'm teaching you today. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, not because I'm naturally an early riser, but because my mind started racing the moment consciousness kicked in. The first thought wasn't gratitude for another day. It wasn't peace about the opportunities ahead. It was immediate anxiety about the presentation I had to give at work, the argument I'd had with my teenage son the night before, and the strange noise my car was making. Instead of taking even 60 seconds to center myself, I grabbed my phone. Bad choice number one. Within minutes, I was scrolling through emails that made my stress levels spike, news that made me feel helpless about the state of the world, and social media posts that made me feel inadequate about my life. By the time I got out of bed, I was already operating from a deficit, already behind, already overwhelmed, and it was only 6 in the morning. The rest of the day unfolded predictably. I snapped at my husband over something trivial because I was already wound tight. I second-guessed every word of my presentation because I was approaching it from insecurity instead of confidence. I had a tense phone call with my mother because I was defensive instead of loving. I made 3 different decisions about dinner and changed my mind each time because I couldn't think clearly through the fog of accumulated stress. By evening, I was exhausted, but it wasn't the good kind of tired that comes from productive work. It was the bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting battles all day long. Battles with my thoughts, battles with my emotions, battles with situations that didn't need to be battles at all. Sound familiar? This is what happens when we don't pray first. We approach every situation from our smallest self instead of our connected self. We operate from our limitations instead of from our access to something unlimited. We start from problem instead of starting from possibility. Now let me show you what that same Tuesday looked like last week, when I remembered to pray first. I still woke up at 5:30, but instead of immediately reaching for my phone, I lay still for 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. I didn't try to solve anything or figure anything out. I simply said, "Good morning, God. I don't know what today is going to bring, but I know you're with me. Help me respond to whatever comes from love instead of fear." That's it. 60 seconds. But those 60 seconds changed the trajectory of my entire day. When I did check my phone, the same emails were there, but I read them from a different place. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by my to-do list, I felt curious about how the day would unfold. Instead of dreading my presentation, I felt excited about the opportunity to share something valuable. Instead of rehearsing worst-case scenarios, I found myself genuinely looking forward to connecting with people. The argument with my son from the night before, instead of letting it fester, I apologized for my part and asked him how we could handle disagreements better in the future. The conversation that followed was one of the best we'd had in months. My presentation went better than I'd dared to hope, not because I was more prepared, but because I was more present. I wasn't performing from anxiety. I was sharing from authenticity. The difference was palpable, and people responded accordingly. The strange noise in my car? Instead of catastrophizing about expensive repairs, I calmly made an appointment with my mechanic. It turned out to be something minor that cost $30 to fix. Same circumstances, different starting point, completely different day. This is what I mean when I say always pray first. It's not about the lengthenance of your words. It's about of your prayer, or the eloque, the posture of your heart. It's about beginning from connection instead of isolation, from trust instead of terror, from abundance instead of scarcity. But here's where most people get stuck. They try this once or twice, and when their circumstances don't immediately transform, they conclude that it doesn't work. They're looking for external change when the real change is happening internally. They're expecting their problems to disappear when what actually happens is that their capacity to handle problems expands. Let me tell you about Rachel, a nurse who contacted me 8 months ago. She was working in a high-stress ICU during one of the most challenging periods in healthcare history. 12-hour shifts, life and death decisions, emotional exhaustion, and the constant fear of bringing something home to her family. "Sarah, I'm burning out," she said. "I love what I do, but I don't know how much longer I can sustain this pace. I pray sometimes, usually when a patient is critical, and I don't know what else to do. But it feels like throwing prayers at emergencies instead of living from a place of peace." Rachel started praying first before every shift. Not long prayers, not complicated requests, just 30 seconds of acknowledging that she wasn't walking into that hospital alone, that she had access to wisdom and strength beyond her own, that she could trust the process even when the outcomes were uncertain. "The first week I didn't notice much difference," she told me. "My shifts were still hard, patients were still critical, the workload was still overwhelming, but something subtle was shifting. I wasn't taking things as personally. When a family was angry or scared, I could see their fear instead of just feeling attacked." By the 3rd week, Rachel's colleagues started commenting on the change. She was calmer in crisis situations, more present with patients, more supportive with families. Her supervisor asked her what was different. "The weird thing is, nothing about my job got easier," Rachel said. "If anything, we've been busier than ever, but I'm handling it from a completely different place. Instead of feeling like I'm drowning all the time, I feel like I'm flowing with whatever comes up." 6 months later, Rachel was promoted to charge nurse. Not because she was working harder, but because she was working from a different source. Her peace was contagious. Her wisdom was evident. Her leadership came from service instead of survival. "I used to think prayer was something you did in church on Sunday," she said. "Now I realize it's how you approach every moment. It's not about asking God to make my job easier. It's about accessing the strength and wisdom to do my job excellently, regardless of how difficult it is." This is the shift that happens when you consistently pray first. Your external circumstances might not change immediately, but your internal capacity to handle those circumstances expands dramatically. You stop being a victim of your emotions and start being a steward of your responses. But let's talk about the resistance you're probably feeling right now, because I know some of you are thinking, "This sounds great in theory, but you don't understand my situation. My problems are real, my stress is justified, my fear is rational given what I'm facing." And you're right. Your problems are real, your stress might be completely justified, your fear might be entirely rational. I'm not suggesting that you pretend everything is fine when it's not, or that you paste a smile on your face and act like positive thinking will solve everything. What I'm suggesting is that real problems require real solutions, and real solutions come from accessing real wisdom. And wisdom doesn't flow freely when you're operating from panic, exhaustion, or confusion. Wisdom comes from stillness, from connection, from the recognition that your perspective, while valid, might not be complete. When you pray first, you're not avoiding reality. You're accessing a fuller version of reality. You're acknowledging that there are resources available to you that you can't manufacture through willpower and caffeine. You're opening yourself to possibilities that your anxious mind can't conceive. Think about it this way. When your computer is running slowly, you don't throw it away and buy a new one. You restart it, you clear the cache, you update the software. You give it a fresh start so it can function the way it was designed to function. Praying first is like restarting your internal operating system. It clears the cache of accumulated worry. It updates your spiritual software. It gives you a fresh start so you can function the way you were designed to function. Now, let me address another form of resistance I encounter frequently. Some people worry that praying first means becoming passive, that it's an excuse to avoid taking action, that it's spiritual bypassing of legitimate responsibilities. This couldn't be further from the truth. Praying first doesn't make you passive, it makes you purposeful. It doesn't eliminate action, it ensures that your action comes from wisdom instead of desperation. It doesn't bypass your responsibilities. It helps you discern which responsibilities are actually yours and which ones you've taken on unnecessarily. Let me tell you about Michael, a father of 4 who was laid off from his executive position 18 months ago. Instead of immediately jumping into frantic job-searching mode, Michael decided to pray first about his next career move. My initial instinct was to take the first decent offer that came along, he said. I was scared about providing for my family, scared about the gap in my resume, scared about being unemployed at 45, but something told me to slow down and really listen before making any major decisions. Michael spent 2 weeks praying first each morning before looking at job postings or sending out resumes. Not 2 weeks of inaction, but 2 weeks of approaching his job search from a different posture. During those 2 weeks, I started realizing how miserable I'd been in my previous job, he said. I'd been so focused on the paycheck and the security that I'd ignored how drained and unfulfilled I felt every day. I started wondering if maybe this layoff was actually an opportunity to find something more aligned with who I actually am. Instead of taking the first offer that came along, Michael took time to consider what kind of work would actually energize him instead of depleting him. He reached out to former colleagues not just to ask about job openings, but to have real conversations about career satisfaction and life balance. The position he eventually accepted paid 15% less than his previous job, but it came with better benefits, a healthier company culture, and work that he found genuinely meaningful. If I had just reacted from fear, I would have taken the first job I could find and probably would have been miserable again within 6 months, Michael said. Praying first didn't make me passive, it made me strategic. It helped me see the bigger picture instead of just focusing on the immediate crisis. This is what praying first actually does. It doesn't eliminate the need for action, but it ensures that your actions are aligned with wisdom instead of driven by desperation. It doesn't guarantee that everything will work out perfectly, but it guarantees that you'll approach whatever happens from your best self instead of your most fearful self. Let me give you another practical example, because I want you to see how this applies to everyday situations, not just major life crises. Last Thursday, I was in the middle of preparing dinner when my daughter called, crying. She'd just found out that her college roommate was moving out unexpectedly, leaving her with a housing situation she couldn't afford on her own. She needed to find a new roommate within 2 weeks or find a different place to live entirely. My first instinct was to immediately jump into problem-solving mode, start making lists of potential solutions, research housing options online, call other parents to ask for advice. My mind was already spinning with all the ways this could go wrong and all the things I needed to do to help fix it. But I caught myself. Instead of diving into action mode, I took 30 seconds to pray first. God, my daughter needs help, and I want to help her, but I don't want to help from anxiety. Give me wisdom to know how to support her best. Show me what's mine to do and what's hers to figure out. Those 30 seconds shifted everything. Instead of taking over her problem, I listened to her process her feelings about the situation. Instead of immediately offering solutions, I asked her what she thought her options were. Instead of making this my crisis to solve, I helped her see that she was capable of handling this challenge. By the end of our conversation, she had come up with 3 potential solutions on her own. She felt empowered instead of overwhelmed. I felt supportive instead of frantic. The situation didn't magically resolve itself, but our approach to the situation was completely different. 2 days later, she called to tell me that one of her friends from her sorority was looking for a roommate for the exact time period she needed. Problem solved, without me having to rescue her or fix anything. "Mom, I'm so glad you didn't just take over and try to solve this for me," she said. "I feel really good about handling it myself." This is what happens when you consistently pray first. You start responding to situations from wisdom instead of reacting from fear. You become a source of calm instead of adding to the chaos. You help people access their own strength instead of making them dependent on your strength. But here's what I really want you to understand. The goal isn't to pray first so that your problems disappear. The goal is to pray first so that you can show up fully to whatever problems you're facing. Some problems are meant to be solved. Others are meant to be endured. Some situations are meant to change. Others are meant to change you. When you pray first, you develop the discernment to know the difference. You stop wasting energy trying to change things that are meant to teach you something. You stop enduring things that you actually have the power to change. You start flowing with life instead of fighting against it. This is the peace that passes understanding, not the absence of problems, but the presence of something bigger than problems. Not the elimination of uncertainty, but the ability to trust in the middle of uncertainty. Not the guarantee of specific outcomes, but the assurance that you're never facing anything alone. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you stand at a crossroads. You can choose to approach whatever you're facing from your own limited resources, or you can choose to approach it from connection to unlimited resources. You can start from your exhaustion, or you can start from access to strength that doesn't depend on how much sleep you got last night. You can start from your confusion, or you can start from access to wisdom that sees the bigger picture. You can start from your fear, or you can start from access to love that's stronger than whatever you're afraid of. The choice is yours, and you get to make it fresh every single day, in every single situation. But here's what I've learned after years of making this choice both ways. Starting from connection is always the better option. Not because it guarantees easier circumstances, but because it guarantees that you'll meet whatever circumstances arise from your best self instead of your most reactive self. Not because it eliminates challenges, but because it expands your capacity to handle challenges gracefully. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up to something. Maybe it's a day that feels manageable and peaceful. Maybe it's a day that feels overwhelming and chaotic. Either way, you get to choose where you start. You can reach immediately for your phone and let other people's agendas set the tone for your day. You can start rehearsing your worries and planning your problems. You can begin from whatever emotion happens to hit you first. Or you can take 60 seconds to remember who you are and whose you are. You can acknowledge that you don't have to carry this day alone. You can access the peace, wisdom, and strength that are always available when you remember to connect before you react. The choice seems obvious when I put it like that, doesn't it? But I know how hard it can be to remember in the moment, when the phone is ringing and the deadlines are looming and the problems feel urgent. That's why I want to give you some very specific tools you can use immediately, starting today. Because knowing what to do and actually doing it are two very different things, and I want to set you up for success. First, let's talk about the preparation phase, because the biggest mistake people make when they decide to start praying first is treating it like another item on their to-do list. They think they need to wake up an hour earlier, find the perfect quiet space, and suddenly become eloquent in their communication with God. That's not what this is about at all. The most powerful prayer I ever prayed was in a grocery store checkout line when my card was declined and I had a cart full of food and 3 hungry kids. I didn't close my eyes or fold my hands or speak out loud. I just thought, help me figure this out, and within seconds I remembered the emergency cash I kept in my wallet. Was that prayer? Absolutely. Was it formal or lengthy or theologically sophisticated? Not even close. But it shifted me from panic to peace in the time it took to swipe my card again. So when I talk about preparation, I'm not talking about creating elaborate morning routines or finding the perfect devotional book. I'm talking about making prayer as accessible as breathing. Because when you're in crisis mode, you need something you can access immediately, not something that requires setup time and perfect conditions. Here's your preparation checklist. First, identify your personal stress signals. For me, it's that tight feeling in my chest and the way my thoughts start spinning faster and faster. For my friend Janet, it's when she starts talking really quickly and can't seem to finish sentences. For my neighbor Paul, it's when his jaw clenches and his shoulders creep up toward his ears. What are your stress signals? The physical sensations, the emotional shifts, the behavioral changes that happen right before you spiral into overwhelm? Write them down. These are your early warning system, your cue to pray first before the situation escalates. Second, create what I call your emergency prayer toolkit. This is 3 simple phrases you can use when your mind is too scattered for creativity. They need to be short enough to remember under pressure and specific enough to actually help. Here are mine. Give me peace right now. Show me what to do next. Help me see this clearly. That's it. No fancy theological language, no trying to sound spiritual, just honest requests for what I actually need in the moment. Third, practice when you're not in crisis. This is crucial. You wouldn't wait until a fire to figure out how to use a fire extinguisher, and you shouldn't wait until you're overwhelmed to practice praying first. Start using your emergency prayers in low-stakes situations. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of getting frustrated, try, "Give me peace right now." When you can't find your keys, instead of panicking, try, "Show me what to do next." When you're trying to decide what to make for dinner, instead of standing in front of the refrigerator feeling overwhelmed, try, "Help me see this clearly." These small moments of practice build the neural pathways that will serve you when the stakes are higher. They make praying first feel natural instead of forced. Fourth, understand that resistance is normal. Your brain is wired to solve problems through analysis and action. When you first start praying first, your mind is going to rebel. It's going to tell you that you're wasting time, that you should be doing something more productive, that this touchy-feely approach isn't going to solve real problems. Expect this resistance. Don't fight it, but don't let it stop you either. Just notice it and keep going. I notice my mind is telling me this is pointless, and I'm going to try it anyway. Let me tell you about Karen, a project manager who struggled with this exact issue. She came to one of my workshops 6 months ago, completely skeptical. "Sarah, I manage million-dollar construction projects," she said. "When there's a crisis on a job site, I don't have time to stop and pray. I need to make decisions quickly and solve problems immediately. This whole pray first thing sounds like luxury I can't afford." Indeed, I understood her perspective completely. When you're used to operating in high-pressure environments, slowing down feels counterproductive. But I challenged her to try it for just 1 week with small situations, not the major crises. "Don't use it when the crane breaks down or when you're behind schedule," I said. "Use it when you get a difficult email, or when someone interrupts your workflow, or when you can't find a parking space. Just tiny moments where you practice shifting from reaction to response." Karen was skeptical, but willing to experiment. The first few times felt awkward and unnatural. Her brain kept telling her she was being inefficient, but by day 4, something started to shift. I was dealing with a subcontractor who was being really difficult about a change order, she told me later. Normally, I would have gotten defensive, and the conversation would have escalated into an argument. But I took 10 seconds before responding and just thought, help me handle this well. Something about that pause changed my approach entirely. Instead of matching the subcontractor's aggressive tone, Karen asked questions to understand his concerns. Instead of defending her position, she looked for solutions that could work for everyone. The conversation that could have damaged their working relationship actually strengthened it. By the end of the week, I was using this approach with bigger situations, Karen said. When we had a major delay due to weather, instead of immediately going into crisis mode, I took a moment to get centered first. It didn't change the weather, but it completely changed how I managed the team's response to the delay. 6 months later, Karen's projects consistently come in on time and under budget. Her teams have higher morale, her stress levels have decreased significantly. Her supervisor asked her to train other project managers on her approach. I still can't believe that something so simple has had such a big impact, she said. But when you start from a calm, centered place, everything else flows better. Decisions are clearer. Communication is more effective. Problems get solved instead of just creating more problems. This is what preparation actually looks like. Not elaborate spiritual practices, but simple tools that work under pressure. Not perfect conditions, but accessible techniques you can use anywhere, anytime. Now let's talk about implementation, because this is where most people get stuck. They understand the concept, they see the value, but they can't figure out how to make it a consistent part of their lives. The key is to start ridiculously small. I mean, embarrassingly small. So small that it feels almost silly not to do it, because the goal isn't to become a prayer warrior overnight. The goal is to build a habit that can grow over time. Start with just one situation per day. Not every stressful moment, not every decision, just one. Maybe it's right when you wake up, before you check your phone. Maybe it's before you walk into work. Maybe it's when you're driving home and feeling the weight of the day. Pick one situation and commit to praying first in that situation for 1 week. Just 1 week. That's 7 opportunities to practice. 7 chances to experience the difference between starting from reaction and starting from response. Here's what this looked like for me when I first started. I chose the moment when I wake up and feel that immediate rush of anxiety about everything I need to accomplish that day. Instead of letting my mind start racing through my to-do list, I would lie still for 30 seconds and say, "Good morning, God. Help me approach today from peace instead of panic." The first few days I forgot. I would be halfway through my mental list making before I remembered I was supposed to pray first. But I didn't give up or start over. I just prayed in that moment, even though I was already in anxiety mode. Okay, I'm already spinning, but I don't want to stay here. Help me shift. By day 5, I was remembering more consistently. By day 7, it was starting to feel natural. Not automatic yet, but natural, like a new habit that was beginning to take root. Week 2, I added a second situation. The moment when I sit down at my computer and see my overflowing inbox. Instead of immediately diving in and feeling overwhelmed by the number of emails, I would take 10 seconds. Give me wisdom to know what's actually important and what can wait. Week 3, I added the moment when one of my kids comes to me with a problem. Instead of immediately trying to fix it or feeling responsible for their emotions, I would take a breath. Help me listen well and respond from love instead of anxiety. Within a month, praying first was becoming my default response instead of something I had to remember to do. Not because I was forcing it, but because I was experiencing the benefits consistently enough that my brain started choosing it automatically. But here's what I want you to understand about implementation. You're going to forget. You're going to have days where you're so overwhelmed that you completely revert to old patterns. You're going to react first and remember to pray somewhere in the middle of your spiral. This is normal. This is expected. This is part of the process, not a failure of the process. When this happens, don't start over. Don't beat yourself up. Don't conclude that you're not cut out for this. Just pray wherever you are in that moment. I'm already spinning, but I don't want to stay here. Help me find peace in the middle of this chaos. Some of my most powerful prayer experiences have happened in the middle of meltdowns, not at the beginning of peaceful mornings. God doesn't require you to have it all together before you can access help. In fact, the more desperate you are, the more open you tend to be to receiving what you need. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a teacher who tried to implement this approach at the beginning of the school year. She chose to pray first every morning before her students arrived, asking for patience and wisdom for the day ahead. The first week went great, she told me. I felt more calm and prepared. My classroom management was better. I was enjoying teaching again instead of just surviving it. But then week 2 hit. Her principal announced budget cuts that would affect her program. 3 of her students were dealing with family crises that were affecting their behavior. She got sick and had to manage lesson plans while feeling awful. I completely forgot about praying first, Jennifer said. I was back to my old pattern of rushing in, feeling overwhelmed and reacting to everything from stress. By Thursday, I was ready to quit. That's when she remembered she didn't have to wait until the next Monday to start over. She could pray first in the middle of her crisis. Standing in her empty classroom after a particularly difficult day, Jennifer just said, "I can't do this alone anymore. I need help. I need peace. I need wisdom. I need strength that doesn't depend on everything going perfectly." It wasn't a magical transformation, she said, but something shifted. The next day, I remembered to pray before my students arrived. When challenges came up, I found myself pausing for just a second before responding. Not every time, but more often than before. By the end of that month, Jennifer had developed what she calls rescue prayers for the middle of difficult moments. When a student was having a meltdown, she would silently pray, "Help me see what this child needs." When a parent was angry about something, she would think, "Give me words that help instead of harm." When she felt overwhelmed by grading, she would ask, "Show me what's actually important here." I realized that praying first doesn't just mean praying at the beginning of the day, Jennifer said. It means praying before I respond to whatever comes up. Sometimes that's at the beginning. Sometimes it's in the middle. Sometimes it's when I'm cleaning up the mess after I've already reacted poorly. This is what sustainable implementation looks like. Not perfection, but progress. Not getting it right every time, but getting it right more often than before. Not eliminating all stress and confusion, but having a reliable tool for accessing peace and clarity when you need it most. The beauty of this approach is that it meets you wherever you are. If you're someone who loves structure and routine, you can build praying first into specific times and situations. If you're someone who lives more spontaneously, you can use it as needed throughout the day. If you're going through a season of crisis, you can use it multiple times per hour. If you're in a peaceful season, you can use it as maintenance for your soul. There's no right way to do this except the way that actually works for your life. The goal isn't to follow someone else's formula perfectly. The goal is to develop your own sustainable practice of starting from connection instead of starting from isolation. But let me address one more form of resistance that comes up frequently. Some people worry that if they pray first about everything, they'll become dependent on prayer instead of developing their own decision-making skills. They're concerned about becoming spiritually codependent, unable to function without constant divine guidance. This concern reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about what prayer actually does. Prayer doesn't replace your thinking. It clarifies your thinking. It doesn't eliminate your decision-making. It improves your decision-making. It doesn't make you dependent. It makes you interdependent, which is how human beings are designed to function. Think about it this way. When you call a trusted friend for advice about a difficult situation, you're not becoming dependent on that friend. You're accessing their perspective to help you see your situation more clearly. You're still the one who has to make the decision and live with the consequences. Prayer works the same way, except you're accessing a perspective that's not limited by human experience or clouded by personal agenda. You're connecting to wisdom that wants what's truly best for you, not just what feels comfortable or familiar. When I pray for guidance about a decision, I'm not asking God to make the decision for me. I'm asking for clarity about what factors are most important, wisdom to see potential consequences I might be missing, and peace about the uncertainty that comes with any significant choice. The decision is still mine. The responsibility is still mine. But the resources I'm drawing from are bigger than my own limited perspective and experience. Let me share one final story before we move to the next section, because I want you to see how this applies to really significant life decisions, not just daily stress management. 2 years ago, my friend Marcus was offered what seemed like a dream job. Better salary, prestigious company, opportunities for advancement he'd never have in his current position. On paper, it was exactly what he'd been working toward for years. But something about it didn't feel right. He couldn't put his finger on what was bothering him. The company culture seemed fine. The work was interesting. The benefits were excellent. His wife was excited about the financial security it would provide. I felt like I should be jumping at this opportunity, Marcus told me, but every time I thought about accepting it, I felt this knot in my stomach. I couldn't figure out if it was just fear of change or if there was something I was missing. Instead of immediately accepting or declining, Marcus decided to pray first about this decision. Not just once, but over the course of 2 weeks. Every morning, he would spend 10 minutes asking for clarity about whether this opportunity was right for him. I wasn't asking for a sign from heaven, he said. I was asking for wisdom to see the situation clearly and peace about whatever decision I made. During those 2 weeks of praying first about this opportunity, several things became clear. Marcus realized that his current job, while less prestigious and lower paying, allowed him to have dinner with his family most nights. The new position would require significant travel and longer hours. He also recognized that he'd been focused on external markers of success instead of thinking about what kind of work actually energized him. The new job would move him further away from the hands-on problem-solving he loved and toward more administrative responsibilities. Most importantly, he gained clarity about his long-term goals. He wanted to eventually start his own consulting business, and his current position was giving him skills and contacts that would be valuable for that dream. The new job would provide more money in the short term, but wouldn't move him closer to his ultimate vision. Marcus declined the offer and stayed in his current position. 6 months later, his company promoted him to a role that gave him both the financial increase he wanted and the flexibility to maintain work-life balance. A year after that, he launched his consulting business on the side with his employer's blessing. If I had just made that decision based on fear or external pressure, I would have taken the wrong job for the wrong reasons, Marcus said. Praying first didn't give me magical insight, but it gave me space to access my own wisdom instead of just reacting to an opportunity. This is what happens when you consistently pray first about significant decisions. You don't become passive or dependent. You become more authentically yourself. You make choices based on wisdom instead of fear, on long-term vision instead of short-term pressure, on what's truly best for you instead of what looks good to other people. Your decision-making doesn't become weaker, it becomes stronger. Your independence doesn't decrease, your interdependence increases. You start living from your truest self instead of from your most reactive self. And that's where real freedom begins. Not in having control over every circumstance, but in having access to peace, wisdom, and strength, regardless of what circumstances you're facing. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you don't need more information or better strategies or stronger willpower. You need connection to something bigger than your temporary emotional state. You need access to resources that don't depend on how much sleep you got or how much coffee you drank or how well your day is going. You need to remember that you're not alone in this, that you don't have to figure everything out by yourself, that there's help available when you're willing to ask for it. That's what praying first gives you. Not a guarantee that life will be easy, but a guarantee that you'll never face difficulty alone. Not the elimination of problems, but the expansion of your capacity to handle problems with grace. This is where we begin. Not with perfect faith or eloquent words or elaborate spiritual practices. We begin with honest acknowledgement that we need help, that our perspective is limited, that our strength is finite. We begin with 30 seconds of connection before we dive into action. We begin with a simple request for peace, wisdom, or strength before we try to solve everything ourselves. We begin with the recognition that we're loved beyond measure, guided beyond our understanding, and supported by something stronger than whatever we're facing. This is always where we begin, and beginning here changes everything that follows. But let me tell you what happens when this becomes more than just a technique you try occasionally. When praying first transforms from something you remember to do into something you instinctively reach for. When it shifts from being an add-on to your life to being the foundation your life is built on. 6 months ago, I met Elena at a coffee shop. She looked exactly like I used to look during my worst seasons. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched forward like she was carrying invisible weight, checking her phone every 30 seconds like she was expecting bad news. She was a single mom, working 2 part-time jobs while finishing her degree, and everything in her life felt like it was held together with duct tape and prayer. Except she wasn't actually praying. Not really. I grew up going to church, she told me, but prayer always felt like something you did when you were desperate or when you needed God to fix something. I've been desperate for 3 years straight, and honestly, I'm tired of asking for help that doesn't seem to come. I understood that exhaustion completely. When you've been running on empty for so long, the idea of adding one more thing to your routine feels impossible. But Elena was curious enough about what I'd shared to try something different. We started with what I call the bathroom prayer. Every time she went to the bathroom, she would take 5 seconds before washing her hands to simply acknowledge that she wasn't carrying her day alone. Not asking for anything specific, not trying to solve any problems, just connecting. It sounds ridiculous, she laughed, but the bathroom is literally the only place I'm alone for more than 30 seconds. Within 2 weeks, Elena started noticing subtle changes. She wasn't snapping at her 8-year-old son as often when he dawdled getting ready for school. She wasn't lying awake at night mentally rehearsing conversations with her professors about late assignments. She wasn't feeling quite as overwhelmed when she looked at her bank account. Nothing major changed in my circumstances, she said, but I felt like I had more space inside to handle whatever came up. By month 3, Elena had naturally expanded her practice. She was praying first before difficult conversations with her ex-husband about custody arrangements. Before opening bills, she was afraid she couldn't pay. Before studying for exams when her brain felt too tired to absorb information. I stopped thinking of prayer as asking God to fix my problems, she said, and started thinking of it as plugging into a power source that helped me handle my problems differently. Last month, Elena graduated with her degree in social work. She found a full-time position at a non-profit that pays enough for her to quit both part-time jobs. Her relationship with her son has never been better. She's even started dating someone who shares her values and treats both her and her child with respect. I'm not saying prayer magically solved all my problems, Elena told me. I still worked incredibly hard. I still had to make difficult choices and sacrifice things I wanted, but I wasn't doing any of it alone anymore. And when you're not doing it alone, everything becomes more manageable. This is what I want you to see. Prayer isn't a magic wand that makes difficult circumstances disappear. It's a power source that enables you to show up to difficult circumstances as your best self instead of your most depleted self. When you're tired, praying first doesn't necessarily give you more energy, but it gives you access to a different kind of energy. The kind that comes from knowing your worth isn't dependent on your productivity. The kind that flows from rest rather than striving. The kind that sustains you even when your physical reserves are depleted. When you're confused, praying first doesn't always provide immediate clarity about what to do, but it provides clarity about who you are and whose you are. And when you know who you are, decision-making becomes simpler. Not easier necessarily, but simpler. Because you're making choices from your core values instead of from your momentary emotions. When you're afraid, praying first doesn't eliminate the uncertainty that's triggering your fear, but it reminds you that uncertainty isn't the same thing as danger. It connects you to a love that's stronger than whatever you're afraid of losing, a security that doesn't depend on controlling outcomes. Let me show you what this looks like in the most ordinary moments, because that's where transformation really happens. Not just in the major crises, but in the accumulation of small choices made from connection instead of isolation. It's Tuesday afternoon, and you're stuck in traffic when you remember you forgot to start the slow cooker this morning. Your family is expecting dinner when you get home, you have nothing planned. And the grocery store will be a nightmare at this time of day. Your mind starts spiraling. You're a failure at meal planning. Your family probably thinks you're incompetent. You should have your life more together by now. This is where most of us live, in the gap between expectation and reality, beating ourselves up for being human. But what if, instead of letting that spiral continue, you took the 30 seconds while you're sitting at a red light to pray first? I'm feeling overwhelmed about dinner and frustrated with myself. Help me approach this from peace instead of panic. Show me a simple solution. Suddenly, you remember that your neighbor mentioned yesterday that she made way too much soup and wondered if you'd like some. Or you realize your kids would actually love breakfast for dinner and you have eggs and pancake mix at home. Or you decide that tonight is a perfect night for pizza and a movie, and that doesn't make you a failure as a parent. Same circumstances, different starting point, completely different experience. Or it's Sunday evening and you're looking at the week ahead. 3 deadlines at work. Your mother-in-law's birthday party that you haven't bought a gift for, a parent-teacher conference for your daughter, a car that's making weird noises, and a credit card bill that's higher than you expected. The familiar weight of overwhelm starts settling on your chest. You could spend the next 2 hours creating detailed to-do lists and contingency plans, trying to control every variable you can think of. You could lie awake tonight, running through worst-case scenarios. You could start Monday morning, already exhausted from the mental energy you spent on Sunday night. Or you could take 3 minutes to pray first about the week ahead. Not asking God to make everything easy, but asking for wisdom to know what actually needs your attention and what you can release. For peace that doesn't depend on having everything figured out. For strength to handle whatever comes up with grace. God, this week feels like a lot. I want to steward my time and energy well, but I don't want to be driven by anxiety about it. Help me focus on what matters most and trust you with the rest. When you start the week from that place, everything shifts. You make your to-do list from wisdom instead of worry. You prioritize from values instead of from urgency. You approach challenges from confidence instead of from fear. This is what I mean when I say always pray first. Not just in emergencies or major life decisions, but in the ordinary moments where life feels overwhelming. Because life is mostly ordinary moments, and how you handle those moments determines the quality of your entire experience. But here's what I've noticed about people who successfully integrate this practice into their lives. They don't try to be perfect at it. They don't create elaborate rules about when and how to pray. They don't beat themselves up when they forget or when they react first and remember to pray later. They simply make prayer their default response to stress instead of their last resort when everything else has failed. They treat it like reaching for a glass of water when they're thirsty, not like a formal ritual that requires special preparation. Let me tell you about James, a police officer who works in one of the most challenging districts in our city. His job requires split-second decisions that can literally mean the difference between life and death. When he first heard about praying first, his reaction was similar to Karen, the project manager. "Sarah, I can't stop and pray when someone is shooting at me or when I'm chasing a suspect through an alley," he said. "In my line of work, hesitation can get people killed." But James was dealing with some serious burnout, 20 years on the force, and he was starting to question whether he could continue doing work that exposed him to humanity's worst impulses day after day. His marriage was strained. He wasn't sleeping well. He was drinking more than he wanted to admit. "I love serving my community," he said, "but I'm not sure how much longer I can handle the emotional toll." We talked about the difference between praying first and praying instead of taking action. James didn't need to stop and pray in the middle of dangerous situations, but he could pray first before his shift started. He could pray first before walking into domestic violence calls or gang-related incidents. He could pray first before difficult conversations with victims' families. James started with just one prayer at the beginning of each shift. "Help me serve with wisdom and courage today. Protect me and my partners. Help me see the humanity in everyone I encounter, even in difficult situations." "The first thing I noticed was that I stopped dreading work," he told me. "I was still dealing with the same situations, but I wasn't carrying them home with me the way I used to. It was like I had more emotional capacity to handle the difficult stuff." Within a few months, James had developed what he calls micro-prayers for specific situations. Before knocking on a door for a wellness check, "Help me bring peace into whatever I'm about to walk into." Before interviewing a witness to a crime, "Give me wisdom to ask the right questions and patience to listen well." Before writing a report about a particularly traumatic incident, "Help me honor these people's story with accuracy and compassion." "I'm not talking about long prayers," James said. "Sometimes it's just a 3-second thought while I'm walking up to a house, but those 3 seconds change how I approach everything that follows." Last year, James was promoted to sergeant, not because he became a better marksman or learned new techniques, but because his approach to policing had shifted. He was calmer in crisis situations, better at de-escalating tense encounters, more effective at building trust with community members. "Prayer didn't make my job easier," he said, "but it made me better at my job." When you approach difficult situations from peace instead of anxiety, from service instead of survival, everything changes. His marriage improved dramatically. His sleep issues resolved. He stopped using alcohol to numb the emotional impact of his work. He started volunteering with youth programs in his district during his off hours. "I used to think my job was about enforcing laws and catching bad guys," James said. "Now I realize my job is about bringing light into dark places. Prayer helps me remember that every single person I encounter is someone's child, someone's story, even when they've made terrible choices." This is what happens when praying first becomes integrated into your identity instead of being something you do occasionally. It doesn't change what you do, it changes how you do it. It doesn't eliminate challenges, it transforms your relationship to challenges. But let me address something that might be troubling some of you. Maybe you've tried praying before and it didn't seem to help. Maybe you've asked God for things that didn't happen, trusted in promises that seemed to fall through, believed for outcomes that never materialized. Maybe you're thinking, "This sounds nice, but I've been disappointed by prayer before. How do I know this won't just be another spiritual technique that works for other people but not for me?" I understand that hesitation completely. because I've been there too. There was a season in my life when I prayed desperately for my father's cancer to be healed, and he died anyway. I prayed for my marriage to be restored, and my husband still left. I prayed for financial provision, and we still lost our house. For a while I concluded that either God wasn't listening, or he was listening but didn't care enough to help, or prayer simply didn't work the way I thought it did. What I eventually realized was that I had been treating prayer like a vending machine. Insert the right combination of faith and desperation, push the button, and get the outcome I wanted. When that didn't happen, I felt betrayed and abandoned. But prayer isn't a transaction. It's a relationship. And like any meaningful relationship, it's not primarily about getting what you want from the other person. It's about connection, communication, and mutual influence. When I pray for healing, and healing doesn't come in the form I expected, prayer still changes something. It changes how I walk through illness. It changes what I learn about love and loss. It changes how I support other people who are facing similar challenges. When I pray for provision, and the money doesn't appear, prayer still provides. It provides peace in the middle of uncertainty. It provides creativity to find solutions I hadn't considered. It provides community as people respond to needs they wouldn't have known about if I hadn't been humble enough to share them. When I pray for relationships to be restored and they don't heal the way I hoped, prayer still restores something. It restores my ability to love without controlling outcomes. It restores my capacity to forgive without receiving apologies. It restores my understanding of what real love actually looks like. This is what I mean when I say prayer always works, but not always the way we expect it to work. Prayer doesn't guarantee that you'll get what you ask for, but it guarantees that you'll be changed by the asking. And often, the change in you is more valuable than the change in your circumstances would have been. Let me tell you about Rebecca, a woman who contacted me last year in the middle of a devastating divorce. Her husband of 15 years had been having an affair and wanted to end their marriage. She to fall back on, had 2 young children and no career, having been a stay-at-home mom throughout their marriage. "I've been praying for months that God would change my husband's heart," she said through tears. "I've been asking for our marriage to be restored, for him to end the affair, for our family to stay together. But nothing is changing except that he seems more determined to leave every day." Rebecca was at that place where prayer felt like a cruel joke. She was doing everything right spiritually, but her circumstances kept getting worse. "Maybe I don't have enough faith," she said. "Maybe I'm being punished for something. Maybe God just doesn't care about my marriage." I listened to Rebecca's story and then asked her a question that surprised her. "What if your prayer is being answered, just not in the way you expected?" She looked at me like I had completely missed the point of everything she'd just shared. "Rebecca, you've been praying for your marriage to be restored," I said. "But what if the marriage you had wasn't actually healthy enough to be worth restoring? What if what you're really asking for is to be valued, cherished, and treated with respect? What if God's answer to that prayer is to free you from a relationship where those things weren't happening?" I could see her processing this idea, and it wasn't comfortable. "What if you started praying differently?" I suggested. "Instead of praying for your circumstances to go back to the way they were, what if you prayed for wisdom to see what could be? What if you prayed for strength to build a life where you and your children are genuinely loved and valued?" Rebecca was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm scared to pray that way. What if it means accepting that my marriage is really over? What if it means accepting that you deserve better than a marriage that requires you to beg someone to choose you?" I asked gently. That conversation shifted everything for Rebecca. She stopped praying for her husband to change and started praying for clarity about what she actually wanted her life to look like. She stopped asking God to restore her old life and started asking for wisdom to build a new one. The transformation was remarkable. Instead of spending her energy trying to convince her husband to stay, Rebecca channeled it into preparing for her future. She enrolled in a program to get her real estate license. She joined a support group for women going through divorce. She started therapy to understand how she had lost herself in trying to keep someone else happy. 18 months later, Rebecca is thriving. She's successful in real estate, confident in her parenting, and recently started dating someone who treats her the way she always deserved to be treated. Her children are happier and more secure than they ever were when their parents were together, but miserable. I realize now that my first prayers were asking God to help me stay in a prison, Rebecca said. When I started praying for freedom instead of restoration, everything changed. Not immediately, and not without pain, but everything changed. Her ex-husband is still living the same patterns with someone new. The affair partner became his girlfriend, then his fiancée, and now Rebecca hears through mutual friends that he's struggling with the same issues in his new relationship. I feel compassion for him, Rebecca said, but I'm so grateful that's not my problem to solve anymore. This is what I want you to understand about prayer. It doesn't always give you what you think you want, but it always gives you what you actually need. Sometimes what you need is change circumstances. Sometimes what you need is the strength to change circumstances that can be changed. Sometimes what you need is the wisdom to accept circumstances that can't be changed, while refusing to let those circumstances define your worth or limit your possibilities. Prayer develops your ability to discern the difference between these three categories. And that discernment is one of the most valuable skills you can develop as a human being. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, prayer doesn't promise to eliminate the tiredness, confusion, or fear, but it promises to meet you in the middle of those experiences with resources you didn't know were available. Sometimes the resource is energy that doesn't depend on caffeine or willpower. Sometimes it's clarity that emerges from stillness rather than analysis. Sometimes it's courage that comes from knowing you're loved regardless of outcomes. But always, always, the resource is connection. Connection to something bigger than your temporary emotional state. Connection to wisdom that transcends your limited perspective. Connection to love that doesn't fluctuate based on your performance or your circumstances. And that connection changes everything, even when it doesn't change anything. This is why we always pray first. Not because it guarantees specific outcomes, but because it guarantees that we never face uncertain outcomes alone. Not because it makes life easy, but because it makes us bigger than whatever difficulties we encounter. Tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up to something unknown. Maybe it will be a day filled with pleasant surprises and smooth sailing. Maybe it will be a day that tests every ounce of resilience you possess. Most likely, it will be a day that contains elements of both joy and challenge, certainty and confusion, energy and exhaustion. You can approach that day from whatever emotional state happens to hit you first when consciousness arrives. You can let your circumstances determine your posture. You can react to whatever comes up based on your most immediate feelings, or you can choose to begin differently. You can take 60 seconds to remember that you're not facing this day alone. You can connect to peace that doesn't depend on everything going perfectly. You can access wisdom that sees possibilities your worried mind can't conceive. You can tap into strength that flows from a source deeper than your own reserves. The day might unfold exactly the same way, regardless of which approach you choose. But you will show up to that day as a completely different person depending on where you start. And the person you are determines everything about how you experience what happens to you. This is where transformation begins, not with changing your circumstances, but with changing your starting point. Not with having different problems, but with bringing a different self to the problems you have. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you always have a choice about where to begin. You can begin from the tiredness, confusion, or fear, or you can begin from something deeper, stronger, and more reliable than whatever you're feeling in the moment. You can begin from connection instead of isolation, from trust instead of terror, from love instead of anxiety. This is always where we begin, and beginning here changes not just how we feel, but who we become in the process of feeling it. But let me tell you what happens when you make this choice consistently, for 6 months, for a year, for 5 years. When praying first stops being something you remember to do and becomes as natural as breathing. When it shifts from being a technique you're trying to being the foundation of who you are. 3 weeks ago, I was having coffee with my friend Patricia, a woman I've known for 8 years. She, breast cancer at 42. A son's been through more than her share of difficulties, who struggled with addiction for years, a husband who left her during the darkest period of her treatment. Financial devastation from medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. When I first met Patricia, she was exactly where you might be right now, exhausted from fighting battles on multiple fronts, confused about which way to turn when every option seemed to lead to more problems, afraid that the hits would keep coming until there was nothing so hard to build. She'd work left of the started praying first out of pure desperation. Not because she was particularly spiritual or because she had great faith, but because she was at the absolute end of herself and had nowhere else to turn. I remember the first time I tried what you suggested, she told me over coffee. I was sitting in my car outside the oncology office, about to go in for my 4th round of chemo. I was so tired I could barely think straight, and I was terrified of what the scan results might show. Instead of walking directly into the building while her mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios, Patricia sat in her car for 2 minutes. She didn't pray eloquently or try to muster up faith she didn't feel. She simply said, "I can't do this alone anymore. Whatever happens in there, please be with me." It was the strangest thing, she said. Nothing about my situation changed. The cancer was still there. The treatment was still going to be awful. The uncertainty was still crushing. But something about my capacity to handle all of it expanded. That was 5 years ago. Today, Patricia is cancer-free. Her son has been sober for 3 years and has rebuilt his relationship with his family. She's in a healthy relationship with someone who chose to walk into her complicated life with eyes wide open. Her finances have recovered to the point where she can help other women facing similar medical crises. But here's what struck me most about our conversation. Patricia wasn't telling me about these changed circumstances as evidence that prayer works. She was telling me about how prayer had changed her relationship to circumstances in general. "The biggest difference isn't what happened to me," she said. "It's who I became while it was happening. I used to be someone who was completely overwhelmed by uncertainty. Now I'm someone who can find peace in the middle of not knowing what comes next." She paused and stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I used to be someone who thought love meant trying to control other people's choices to keep them safe. Now I understand that love sometimes means letting people experience the consequences of their decisions while still being there to support them." Another pause. "I used to be someone who measured my worth by how well I could manage everything by myself. Now I know that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. This is what happens when you consistently pray, first over years, instead of just weeks or months. You don't just learn a stress management technique, you become a different kind of person. The kind of person who stays calm in crisis because your peace isn't dependent on controlling outcomes. The kind of person who makes decisions from wisdom instead of fear because you're connected to a source of guidance that sees what you can't see. The kind of person who loves deeply without being destroyed when that love isn't returned in the way you hoped. Because your security doesn't come from other people's responses to you. Let me show you what this looks like in real time, because I want you to see how different your life could be a year from now if you start making this choice consistently today. Last month, I got a call at 11:30 at night from my 25-year-old daughter. She was crying so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. Her long-term boyfriend had ended their relationship completely out of the blue. She was devastated, confused, and convinced that her entire future had just evaporated. 5 years ago, that phone call would have sent me into immediate problem-solving mode. I would have stayed up until 3 in the morning, trying to help her analyze every detail of the breakup, figure out what went wrong, and strategize ways to either fix the relationship or move on quickly. I would have absorbed her pain as if it were my own and carried it for weeks. But because praying first has become my default response to emotional emergencies, something different happened. Before I said a single word to comfort her, I silently prayed, "Help me love her well right now. Give me wisdom to know when to speak and when to just listen. Help me support her without trying to fix what might not need fixing." The 30 seconds shifted everything about prayer, how I showed up for my daughter in that moment. Instead of jumping into analysis mode, I listened, really listened. Not to formulate responses or solutions, but to understand what she was actually feeling underneath the immediate shock and pain. Instead of trying to make her feel better by minimizing the loss or rushing towards silver linings, I validated that this was genuinely hard and that it made sense that she would be heartbroken. Instead of offering advice about what she should do next, I asked her what she thought she needed most right now. Space to grieve, time with friends, a few days at home, or did she want to talk through what happened? "Mom, you're being so calm about this," she said at one point. "I was afraid you were going to panic with me or start telling me everything happens for a reason or something." What my daughter didn't know was that I had prayed first. Not because I wasn't concerned about her pain, but because I wanted to respond to her pain from love instead of from my own anxiety about her suffering. 2 weeks later, she called to thank me for that conversation. "You helped me realize that I could handle this," she said. "Instead of making me feel like it was a crisis that needed to be solved immediately, you helped me see that heartbreak is something human beings are designed to move through. You trusted me to process it instead of trying to process it for me." 6 months later, my daughter is thriving. She's discovered interests and friendships that she hadn't had time for while she was in a relationship. She's more confident in her career. She's learning to enjoy her own company in ways she never had before. And yes, she's started dating someone new who seems much better suited for who she's becoming. But the real victory isn't that her circumstances improved. The real victory is that she navigated a genuinely difficult experience with grace and emerged stronger because of it, not in spite of it. And that happened partly because I had learned to pray first before responding to her crisis, which meant I supported her healing instead of interfering with it. This is what I mean when I say that praying first changes everything, even when it doesn't change anything. My daughter's heartbreak was real. The relationship ending was genuinely painful. The uncertainty about her future was legitimately scary. Prayer didn't eliminate any of those realities, but it changed how both of us moved through those realities. And how you move through difficult experiences determines what you learn from them, how you grow because of them, and what kind of person you become on the other side of them. When you consistently pray first, you stop being someone who gets derailed by every unexpected challenge and start being someone who can navigate challenges with wisdom and grace. You stop being someone who reacts to life and start being someone who responds to life. The difference between reacting and responding might seem subtle, but it's actually profound. Reacting is automatic, immediate, and usually based on your most surface-level emotions. Responding is intentional, thoughtful, and connected to your deeper values and wisdom. When you react to your teenager's attitude, you might snap back with your own attitude, escalating a minor conflict into a major battle. When you respond to your teenager's attitude, you might recognize that they're probably stressed about something else and address the underlying issue instead of just the surface behavior. When you react to unexpected bills, you might panic about money and make desperate financial decisions that create more problems later. When you respond to unexpected bills, you might calmly assess your options and make strategic choices that address the immediate need without compromising your long-term financial health. When you react to criticism from your boss, you might become defensive and damage your professional relationships. When you respond to criticism from your boss, you might listen for valuable feedback while maintaining your professional dignity. The difference between reacting and responding is the difference between being controlled by your circumstances and being empowered to influence your circumstances. And prayer is what creates the space for response instead of reaction. Let me tell you about Carlos, a man who came to one of my workshops 18 months ago. He was a successful attorney who appeared to have his life completely together from the outside. Beautiful home, thriving practice, wife, 2 kids, active in his community. But Carlos was miserable. He was working 70-hour weeks, rarely saw his children except to enforce homework and bedtime rules, and had developed what he called lawyer brain, the inability to turn off the analytical, combative thinking that served him well in court but was destroying his personal relationships. "I react to everything like it's a legal battle I need to win," he told me. "My wife asked me to take out the trash, and I find myself building a case for why it's not my turn. My 8-year-old wants help with his science project, and I start cross-examining him about whether he's really tried to figure it out himself first." Carlos had tried therapy, meditation apps, exercise routines, and vacation time. Nothing seemed to help him shift out of that reactive, competitive mindset that was slowly eroding his connection with the people he loved most. "I feel like I'm living my life in court mode 24 hours a day," he said. "Even when I try to relax, I'm analyzing whether I'm relaxing efficiently or correctly." We started with the simplest possible intervention. Before every interaction with his family, Carlos would take 5 seconds to pray. "Help me show up as a husband and father, not as a lawyer." That's it. 5 seconds. 1 sentence. But those 5 seconds created space between his automatic professional persona and his intentional family persona. The first week, Carlos forgot more often than he remembered. But when he did remember to pray first before family interactions, he noticed immediate differences in how those conversations went. "My son asked me to help him with math homework," Carlos told me. "Normally, I would have launched into this interrogation about what he'd already tried and whether he was really paying attention in class. But I took those 5 seconds to pray first, and instead I just said, 'Sure, buddy. Let's look at this together.'" The homework session that followed was completely different. Instead of Carlos lecturing while his son felt stupid, it became a collaborative problem-solving experience where they both enjoyed figuring out the math concepts together. "For the first time in months, my son actually seemed to enjoy spending time with me," Carlos said. Within 6 weeks, Carlos was naturally praying first before most family interactions. Not because he was forcing himself to remember, but because he was experiencing such consistently better outcomes when he started from connection instead of starting from his professional default mode. His wife started commenting on the change. His children began seeking him out for conversations instead of avoiding him when he came home from work. Family dinners became enjoyable instead of tense. But here's the part that surprised Carlos the most. The practice of praying first at home started affecting how he showed up at work too. "I started praying first before difficult client meetings," he said. "Instead of going in ready for battle, I would ask for wisdom to understand what the client actually needed and how I could best serve their interests." His client relationships improved dramatically. Instead of clients feeling like Carlos was just trying to rack up billable hours, they started feeling like he was genuinely invested in finding the best solutions for their situations. His colleagues noticed the change too. Carlos became the person other attorneys came to when they needed help with particularly challenging cases, not because his legal skills had improved, but because his approach had become more collaborative and less adversarial. "I'm still a good lawyer," Carlos told me recently, "maybe even a better lawyer than I was before. But now I'm also a good husband and father and colleague. I used to think I had to choose between being successful professionally and being present personally. Turns out, when you learn to respond instead of react, you can actually excel in both areas. Last month, Carlos was offered a partnership at his firm. Instead of automatically accepting because it represented the next rung on the career ladder, he took time to pray first about whether this opportunity aligned with the kind of life he wanted to build. After a week of consideration, he accepted the partnership but negotiated terms that would allow him to maintain better work-life balance. He's now mentoring younger attorneys, not just in legal strategy, but in how to build sustainable careers that don't require sacrificing everything else that matters. This is what happens when praying first becomes integrated into your identity. You don't just manage stress better, you become someone who creates less stress because you're operating from wisdom instead of from reactivity. You don't just survive difficult seasons. You thrive during them because you're accessing resources that don't depend on your circumstances being perfect. You don't just get through each day, you show up to each day as the person you actually want to be, instead of as a victim of whatever emotions or pressures happen to hit you first. But let me address one more concern that comes up frequently. Some people worry that if they pray about everything, they'll become spiritually needy or emotionally weak. They're concerned about developing a crutch mentality where they can't function independently. This concern reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about what independence actually means. True independence isn't the ability to handle everything by yourself without any support. That's not independence. That's isolation. And isolation makes you weaker, not stronger. True independence is the ability to access the resources you need when you need them. It's knowing when to rely on your own skills and when to seek guidance. It's being secure enough in yourself to acknowledge when you're operating beyond your capacity. When you pray first consistently, you don't become more dependent. You become more discerning about what actually requires your personal effort and what can be handled through accessing wisdom, strength, or perspective beyond your own. Think about it this way. If you're trying to move a piano by yourself and you're struggling, you have two choices. You can keep trying to muscle it alone, risking injury and probably not succeeding. Or you can get help from people who have the right equipment and experience to move pianos safely and efficiently. Getting help doesn't make you weak or dependent. It makes you smart. It accomplishes the goal more effectively while preserving your energy for things that actually require your personal effort. Prayer works the same way. When you pray first about challenges you're facing, you're not becoming dependent on God to solve all your problems. You're accessing divine perspective to help you solve problems more effectively. You're connecting to wisdom that helps you see solutions you might have missed. You're drawing on strength that enables you to persevere when your own reserves are depleted. You're finding peace that allows you to think clearly instead of operating from panic. The result isn't that you become helpless without constant divine intervention. The result is that you become more effective, more resilient, and more capable of handling whatever life brings your way. Let me share one final story to illustrate what this looks like when it's fully integrated into someone's life. 2 years ago, I met Dr. Sarah Chen at a conference. She's an emergency room physician who deals with life and death situations on a daily basis. Her job requires split-second decisions, incredible stamina, and the ability to remain calm when everything around her is chaotic. When I first met Dr. Chen, she was struggling with burnout so severe that she was considering leaving medicine entirely. She loved helping people, but the constant stress was affecting her health, her marriage, and her relationship with her teenage children. "I became a doctor because I wanted to save lives," she told me. "But lately I feel like this job is killing me. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm irritable with my family. I lie awake at night replaying difficult cases and worrying about patients." "Doctor, Chen was skeptical about prayer as a practical tool for someone in her profession. "I need to be able to think clearly and act quickly," she said. "I can't afford to hesitate or second-guess myself because someone's life might depend on my immediate response." I explained that praying first wasn't about hesitating or second-guessing. It was about accessing a calm, centered state that actually improves decision-making under pressure. We started with Dr. Chen praying for 30 seconds at the beginning of each shift, not asking for easy cases or fewer emergencies, but simply connecting to something bigger than the immediate pressure of her job. "Help me serve with wisdom and compassion today. Give me clarity in difficult decisions and strength for whatever comes." Within 2 weeks, Dr. Chen noticed that she was feeling less anxious when she arrived at work. She was sleeping better on her days off. She had more patience with difficult patients and their families. "It was like I had more emotional bandwidth," she said. "I was still dealing with the same traumatic cases, but I wasn't absorbing the trauma the way I used to." After 6 weeks, Dr. Chen started praying briefly before particularly challenging procedures or difficult conversations with families. Not long prayers that would slow down her response time, but quick connections to peace and wisdom. "Before I would go talk to a family about their loved one's condition, I would take 10 seconds to pray for the right words," she said. "It completely changed how those conversations went. Instead of just delivering medical information, I was able to communicate with genuine compassion." The transformation was remarkable. Dr. Chen's colleagues started commenting on how much calmer she seemed during crisis situations. Her supervisor asked her to mentor new residents because of her ability to remain centered under pressure. But the biggest change was in Dr. Chen's home life. Instead of coming home emotionally depleted and irritable, she was able to transition from work mode to family mode more smoothly. "I started praying first when I pulled into my driveway after work," she said. "Before I walked into the house, I would take a minute to shift from being Dr. Chen, who saves lives, to being Sarah, who loves her family." Her marriage improved dramatically. Her relationships with her teenagers deepened. She started enjoying her days off instead of spending them recovering from work stress. "Prayer didn't make my job easier," Dr. Chen told me recently. "If anything, I'm busier than ever because I've taken on more teaching responsibilities. But prayer made me better at my job and better at life in general." Last year, Dr. Chen was chosen to lead a new initiative at her hospital focused on physician wellness and preventing burnout. She's now teaching other healthcare professionals how to maintain their emotional and spiritual health while dealing with high-stress medical situations. "I tell them that prayer isn't about being religious," she said. "It's about staying connected to your purpose and your humanity when your job requires you to see suffering every day." Dr. Chen has been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years now, and she's more passionate about her work than she's ever been. Not because the work got easier, but because she learned how to do difficult work from a place of strength and peace, instead of from a place of stress and depletion. This is what I want you to see. When you consistently pray first, you don't become someone who needs constant spiritual support to function. You become someone who has learned to access the resources that enable you to function at your highest level, even in the most challenging circumstances. You become someone who can handle crisis without being consumed by it. Someone who can love deeply without being destroyed when that love involves loss. Someone who can work hard without sacrificing your health or your relationships. You become someone who shows up fully to your life instead of just surviving your life, and that transformation begins with a simple choice you can make right now, in this moment, regardless of what you're facing. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you can choose to begin from that tiredness, confusion, or fear. You can let those feelings determine your next steps and drive your decisions, or you can choose to begin from something deeper, something more reliable, Something that doesn't fluctuate based on your circumstances or your energy level or your ability to figure everything out perfectly. You can begin from connection instead of isolation, from wisdom instead of worry, from love instead of fear. This choice is available to you right now, not after you get your life more organized, not after you resolve your current problems, not after you become more spiritual or develop better habits. Right now, in this moment, with whatever you're carrying, whatever you're worried about, whatever you're trying to figure out, take 30 seconds. Acknowledge that you don't have to carry this alone. Ask for what you actually need: peace, wisdom, strength, clarity, courage, hope. Then notice what shifts. Not necessarily in your circumstances, but in your capacity to handle your circumstances. Not necessarily in what's happening around you, but in what's happening inside you. And tomorrow, when you wake up to whatever tomorrow brings, remember that you have this choice again. You can begin from reaction or from response, from your most anxious self or from your most connected self. The choice you make in that moment will determine not just how your day unfolds, but who you become in the process of living that day. This is where transformation begins, not with perfect circumstances, but with a different starting point. Not with having all the answers, but with being connected to the source of all answers. Not with being strong enough to handle everything alone, but with being wise enough to know you don't have to. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, this is always where you begin, with connection, with acknowledgement that you're part of something bigger than whatever you're facing, with the simple recognition that you are loved, guided, and supported beyond your ability to earn it or understand it. This is where peace lives. This is where wisdom flows. This is where strength is renewed and hope is restored and love casts out fear. This is always where you begin, and beginning here changes everything that follows. But I know some of you are still wrestling with doubt. You're thinking, Sarah, this all sounds beautiful in theory, but my problems are massive. My marriage is hanging by a thread. My business is failing. My child is struggling with addiction. My health is deteriorating. How can 30 seconds of prayer possibly make a difference when I'm facing issues this serious? Let me tell you about Robert, a man who asked me that exact question 8 months ago. Robert was a successful contractor who had built a thriving business over 20 years. But then the economy shifted. 3 major clients defaulted on payments. His crew of 12 employees was looking to him for answers he didn't have. His wife was battling depression. His 17-year-old daughter had been caught using drugs twice. Sarah, I've got $250,000 in unpaid invoices, employees who need paychecks, and a family that's falling apart, he said. I need solutions, not spiritual platitudes. I need money to come in, my daughter to get clean, and my wife to get help. How is prayer going to make any of that happen? Robert's frustration was completely understandable. When you're drowning, you want a life preserver, not advice about swimming techniques. But here's what I've learned about crisis situations. The bigger the problem, the more crucial it becomes to start from the right place. When you're facing multiple emergencies simultaneously, your natural instinct is to attack everything at once. You try to solve the business crisis while managing the family crisis, while dealing with the financial crisis, while addressing the relationship crisis. You operate in pure survival mode, making desperate decisions because everything feels urgent. But crisis demands clarity, not chaos, and clarity comes from stillness, not from frantic activity. I asked Robert to try something that felt completely counterintuitive, given the magnitude of what he was facing. Before he made any major decisions about his business, before he had any difficult conversations with his wife or daughter, before he responded to creditors or employees, I asked him to spend 5 minutes each morning doing nothing but acknowledging he wasn't facing any of this alone. 5 minutes, he said. Sarah, I don't have 5 minutes. I wake up already behind on everything. Robert, you're going to spend the next 6 months making decisions that will determine the future of your business and your family, I replied. Can you afford to make those decisions from panic and exhaustion? Or would it be worth investing 5 minutes each day to make them from wisdom and peace? Reluctantly, Robert agreed to try it for 1 week. The first morning he sat in his truck in the driveway before going into his office. He felt ridiculous, but he was desperate enough to try anything. God, I don't know how to fix any of this, he said out loud. I need wisdom I don't have. I need strength I don't feel. I need solutions I can't see. Help me approach today from trust instead of terror. That single prayer shifted everything about how Robert handled that day. Instead of immediately calling clients to demand payment, which had been his plan, Robert took time to really examine his cash flow situation. He realized that 2 of the 3 defaulting clients were actually good people facing their own temporary difficulties. He worked out payment plans with them instead of threatening legal action. Instead of having a heated confrontation with his daughter about her drug use, which had been brewing for weeks, Robert approached the conversation from curiosity instead of anger. I'm scared about what's happening with you, he told her. Can you help me understand what you're going through? Tomorrow morning when you wake up, you're going to have a choice. You can grab your phone immediately and let the world's chaos set the tone for your day. You can start rehearsing your problems before your feet hit the floor. Or you can take 30 seconds to remember that you don't have to carry this day alone. When you're tired, confused, or afraid, you always have this choice. You can begin from your exhaustion, your confusion, your fear, or you can begin from connection to something bigger, stronger, and more reliable than whatever you're feeling. This is where transformation starts. Not with perfect circumstances, but with a different starting point. Always pray first. It changes everything that follows.